I am privileged to have the three panelists here to talk about production roles and from a variety of standpoints. So we're going to lead off with Philippa Benson, who is, and I'm just going to introduce you all straight away, and then that way we don't have to jump up and down. Who's the Director of Strategic and Business Development at Charlesworth, who is a vendor that specializes in doing XML workflow work, and so she's going to talk about XML and how important it is. And then we're going to have Devakos, who is the coordinator of the Scholar Communication program for the University of Toronto Libraries, and oversees a variety of really interesting projects, not dissimilar in some respects to the services that we offer at Cedar, so I'm delighted to have her talk about that. And we're going to end up with Maria Bonn, who's the Associate University Librarian for Publishing at University of Michigan, and who many of you know already. And she'll be talking about building the scholarly publishing infrastructure and challenges and first moves and reorganizations and exciting things that she'll be talking about. So welcome to our panel, and we'll start off with Philippa.
Good afternoon. I know you're all going to want to sleep after filling your tummies, so I'll try and be moderately entertaining here. Before I start, I'd like to just get a show of hands of how many people feel comfortable with XML. Okay, good, about half of you. For those of you who are comfortable with XML, please excuse me. I'm going back to 101 for those who aren't comfortable with XML. So I'm going to be going way back to the basics, and I think it's important in many ways to understand why. And I originally called this It's Not Rocket Science, because in many ways XML is very simple, what it does, what it can do for you. But the more you get into it, the more complicated it becomes, and the more you realize you actually don't know about it. So I wanted to highlight both sides of that spectrum. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about me, because I am going to be talking to you from a vendor's point of view. I work with the Charlesworth group right now, and part of my job is to go around and sell XML. But I come from a very eclectic, I've got my little odd duck up there in the corner background with degrees in rhetoric and composition, training non-native speakers of English, being on the editorial side of things, starting publishing programs, which I always had to tell people, no, I don't want to call them publishing programs. I want to call them information resources programs, because the publications and the websites and the online things all have to be together. And you say publishing, and people think about print. And I also have done quite a bit of teaching in mainland China to scientists there. So I'm really taking a lot of what I'm bringing to you. A little slice of it is from my relatively shallow experience as someone working for a for-profit vendor, and the rest of my perspective is grounded in these other aspects of my history. One of the things I'm going to talk about today is the Charlesworth Group, but in particular, it's a family firm, started in 1928, global publishing services, offices around the world, and the mainstay of the business had been, for a long time, as I said, selling XML, helping people to go in and go electronic, starting with XML. The business is changing right now because it is the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is gone. The people who know what XML is and are ready to go into an XML workflow are already doing that. The other people in the publishing, library, scholarly research community do not quite know how to get XML into their workflow. So increasingly, what we're finding we have to do is step back and be business consultants, management consultants, and overall cheerleaders for XML to help people step back and look at where they are, where they want to go, and how, given their staffs, given their missions, given their budgets, how can they start using XML, and why, and how can they make internal arguments for the advantages of using XML. As I said, I know a little bit about something that's very deep. So I want to attribute the people that helped me put some of these slides together. Some of them are cribbed directly from other presentations because they're beautiful representations, I thought. So people from ACS who have very complicated XML and DTDs, and it's very confusing to me. Kiwi Technologies that do applications and mobile devices, the Data Conversion Lab as well, and the recent conference on journal tagging suites that was held at the NIH. So again, just to underscore, I'm here to talk about the roles that you can play, you being sort of generic librarians in a way. I'm sorry, I mean that in the most complimentary of fashions. And to improve the quality of your publications, that which, or your information through editorial and publishing development. So why go back to basics? Again, all these acronyms can get pretty confusing after a while. I've also cribbed, I don't know if any of you remember the keynote speech at SSP maybe 5 years ago or something that was called Publishers or Libellishers. And to me, that is sort of where we are right now. You got to pick one of them, and where are you going to be weighted? Are you going to be more on the library side or more the publishing side, or do we just pick one of these and use this new term to describe the new construct of the professional people we're becoming? So, when I started at the Charlesworth Group, I was told you should go out and help people understand how you can get a text, let's just call it a document file, and how you can move it into print and online and into some sort of mobile but computer-based format, and you can do it in one workflow for one cost for all those readers of all those technologies. And that lasted for about, a month or two. And then they said, well, now you've got to also tell people how they can get all this other stuff also. So how you can get it onto mobile applications and different readers and different formats. And then this one on the picture on the left is supposed to be libraries and archives and databases and all that other stuff where people want to put and deposit their core materials. And I was charged with explaining all of that. So we know that ancient electronic publishing or PDFs and HTML and proprietary platforms. Do any of you here use proprietary platforms like Texterity or Nextbook or any of those flipping technologies that are so popular in the association world? Nobody. See, it's just not even in the scholarly community, whereas in the association publishing, these are the hot platforms. Based on a conversation that some of our colleagues and I had last night, I'm rethinking that maybe I should put the Kindle up as an ancient technology now. So when I go in now to some scholarly societies, I have to start saying, is everybody on the same page with understanding what HTML is? And I would say 90% of the people go, yeah, I get HTML. It's just talking about format. But then saying, what is XML? And I put up this code in XML, and there's kind of a blank stare, and some people nodding like, I get it, but it still worries. There's a lot of furrowed brows. So, I go about showing how these tags, and you can actually read them. The nice thing about XML is it is human readable. It's machine readable, but it's human readable, and it's supposed to be standard. So you put a representation and you say, okay, break it down, and you can see that all these tags are telling you what the content is. And it's mixed in with format tags and other kinds of tags, but that base is machine readable and human readable, so it can be checked. It can be quality controlled. So how do you then use it? I explain to these groups who have not yet started using an XML workflow and really don't even understand what XML is. And I go through the workflow process, saying, you begin with a Word file. And when you send it to us, your vendor, oops, sorry, that went a little bit back here. You go to us, your vendor, and we take that and we clean it up. We automatically remove extra spaces, do spell checks, do reference checks. That's pardon me, this is just going to go on its own for a while. You get the drift, I think. And we can style this so that your headings are the right size and the right color and all that stuff that a lot of your production people have been doing is off your plate now. This is easy stuff for machines to do. Then, now we go, so you get an RTF file, and I'm sorry, it is I who, next. Okay, there you go. That RTF file is then converted through a filter to XML. And it's put into this format, and again, it's quality controlled. And that's one of the things that good vendors can do, is we can make sure that the quality is there. And if the XML is problematic, there are some automatic queries that come out when the files are ready to be seen by the client. That XML then, through another conversion program, gets paginated into a template. And that's quality controlled, again. And out of that template, according to what the client wants, and originally, basically, they wanted print-ready pages and something to put up on the web, either web-ready PDFs or HTML. Those were the products that people wanted. And you can go through this cycle of from the Word document to the style document to the XML to the page over and over again and not pay for any changes, because it's all just little things by already in that XML file. So all those author alteration costs are minimized unless there's some big thing, or eliminated. And this can happen if you have a clean text and a clean template and very straightforward XML. You can get pages made in 5 minutes. And people look and they go, oh my God. Now, if someone takes this process and they have been doing a paper and online journal, and they probably have editors and copy readers and designers and other people involved in this, all of a sudden the jobs that those people will be doing will be changing. And they'll be changing quite dramatically. And even some of the jobs may not be needed anymore. So coming in and saying, I have this wonderful thing that you need, especially if you want to get into PubMed Central, because you've got to deposit the XML. And all of a sudden, their staffing changes, their workflow changes, their day-to-day lives are going to change dramatically. How are they going to spend their money? Where are they going to spend their money? How are they going to go through this cultural shift? And they step back and say, we're not ready, but we want to understand this. So for vendors like Charlesworth, we end up spending our time, instead of saying, here, buy this thing, XML, we end up sitting and spending an enormous amount of time in a coaching and instructional mode. So as in that first slide that I had that said, journal, XML, and then the publishing services. The publishing services, for lack of a better term, is what is growing among vendors because of all the complexity of the problems of people in different stages of going deeply electronic and getting the full range of the value of XMLs. Oh, 5 minutes, gosh. Okay, so you've got to get all these customized applications. Now, just to go a little bit more about DTDs. How many of you are familiar with DTDs? All right, all of you, so I won't, or most of you. DTDs, as you know, come in multiple flavors. And as you then know, those multiple flavors are getting having nuts and raisins and chocolate chips put in them, and those are becoming more and more and more specialized. And the questions then become, even for the more sophisticated publishers or publishers or libellishers, is where do you want to spend your time? Do you want to spend your time keeping up with all the extra additions to the DTDs that are being developed? So this DTD spectrum from DTDs that are more for archiving and interchange to the DTDs that are more for authoring or the creation of new materials. This is just a model from the ACS of their DTDs, tags and schemas and modules of things, just to show this is where people start to get into the more you know, you don't know. Because every group tends to have a slightly different mental model of how their DTDs and how their XML works, and that mental model is based on very finely tuned different details within the DTDs and the tags and the modules. This is another one, extended DTDs, reduced, customized, built. Some are XML compatible, some aren't. Again, these are the multiple flavors. So we're talking about this tagging spectrum going from the untagged content to the richly tagged content, which is essentially grounded in XML of some sort, of some flavor, depending on the DTD that's used. There are also other options such as XMP, which are PDFs that can have some level of XML essentially stuck to them or adhered to the PDF, and then moving into the ePub, where there are in theory, ePub XHTML is supposed to be a base, and the base may be the same, the ePub may be the same, but every reader is different. So you've got to change and decide how you want to spend your money to get the ePub to be readable and usable, and do you want more features, the different kinds of readability. I'm getting close on time. So these are just some examples of different groups that we have worked with here, it's the Center for Disease Control, whose workflow has been based on having the HTML as their core document, as their document of record. So their workflow went from a doc file to HTML, then to pages, and then they extracted the XML from the pages. So that workflow developed historically. And to change that workflow, to start with XML, what the costs are, what the roles and responsibilities of different people within their very large and complex organization, where the peer review was going to be done, were very, very complicated sorts of problems to work out, that they needed feedback from us about the costs and the possibilities of different things. Some of you may recognize this workflow. This was from the very, very beginning days of PLOS, what happened before they started working with our group, and what their workflow was like, and then when they went to a streamlined XML workflow in the yellow. I've got 30 seconds left. So just to say, readers, your users are beginning to expect more of their texts. They're going to want to, when they are reading, do other things. They're going to want to watch videos. They're going to want to communicate. They're going to want to interact with the information in different ways. And to be able to do that cost effectively, XML is a good place to start. But if you're working already, getting to starting with XML is a long and winding road. My time is up. Thanks very much.
So I want to start by thanking the Society for Scholarly Publishing and the Association for Research Libraries for inviting me. I hope you find this useful. I'm going to go through this at a fairly fast clip. And I'm going to talk about, well, let me start with this. My interest in providing publishing services or hosting services is really about making those services part of the library mainstream. And I've given you two pictures here. One happens to be a picture of our rare book library, which I love and is an affirming place, and I would never give up. And I have had people say to me that they'd love to steal it. So, but you know, it's a special place, and it is supported not only through operating funds, but through endowments and donations and grants. It's an expensive place. And I've given you a picture of our stacks from one of our main libraries. And I was thinking as I was sitting here that I should have given you a picture of our stacks, what they look like at certain times of term. Because your stacks look like that too, right? The floors are clean right now, but you know what they look like. But when I think about these services, I think about how can we fund these services largely through library operations. Because I think that's what it's going to take. And that's my fail-safe option. So I'm going to give you some examples of my attempts to do that. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Where's the... Here? I do use this program. I just freeze when I'm talking. It just... Oh, duh. Okay. Page down. Okay. So like many of you, we started with a repository. This is our institutional repository, TSpace, run on the DSpace platform. Like many of you, we did not get the content we expected. One of the largest pieces of content we got, though, was journals, not journal articles, but journals affiliated with the University of Toronto, small journals that needed a place to archive. And so I've given you a screenshot. Probably you can't read it. Those are some titles from the BioLine collection, a project to facilitate publishing, scientific publishing in the third world that is affiliated with the U of T. We archive those journals. We're a bit behind, but there's 83 titles there. And we archive a number of other journals on our campus. So that's how we actually got started with journals. We also run the open conference system, and we've hosted about 10 conferences. Interesting, nobody wants to put their proceedings up. So that's been an interesting finding. How many of you run the open conference system? Okay, not that many, okay. Most of the journals that have relationships with libraries, hosting relationships, and certainly ours, are small and independent journals. And I've just listed some of the challenges. I'm sure you're all aware of them that are facing small challenges. I needed to give you a bit of a Canadian lesson because our context is a bit different. There is government and institutional subsidies available to a larger extent for social sciences and humanities, small journals in Canada. There are fewer commercial presses, and there are more society and purely independent journals, which is interesting. And the last 3 points are actually from a presentation that Ray Crow did at the last Canadian Association of Learned Journals meeting. And one of the things that he was arguing is that because of this context, we actually have a greater opportunity to go open access faster and to partner with libraries. And indeed, the Canadian Association of Learned Journals just completed a survey. Fully a third of their members that completed the survey are open access, which actually, when we started meeting with that group, there was some tension. You know, people had to learn to work with each other, and there was concern about not only moving open access, but moving to digital. And that was just 3 years ago, so it's been an amazing amount of progress. Our journal production site, we run on Open Journal System. How many of you are using Open Journal System? Okay, some people, but I'm assuming that most people know about Open Journal System, is that correct? Okay. So the site itself is pretty ugly. I mean, it's okay, but it's pretty bare bones. Most of our journals have their own URL, and so their online presence is tied to their own URL, and so we're really an afterthought, and we don't want it to be, you know, totally ugly, but that's not the issue. And I've just given you a cover from one of our journals, which happens to be the Journal of Undergraduate Life Sciences. We host 27 live journals, and we're working with another 4 right now. 11 of them are student-led. And I'm going to give you just a very brief overview of some of them. We insist on some open access. But we do have purely open access and delayed open access. We have journals that were born on our platform. We have journals that were born digitally on homegrown platforms. We have journals that were born on other instances of OJS. We have journals that were born in print and continue to publish in print. We have journals that were born in print, sort of died a death, and then were resurrected electronically. There's another category that we have that and we have journals that were actually born in print and then had to cease their print but have continued on electronically. We have one of those journals. And we have one society journal. Well, actually, I guess we have a relationship with ITER. So that's, and we have a few journals that are experiencing some growing pains as they move from editor to editor, for example, or are having problems getting launched. And you know, one of the questions that I've got is, one of the things we want to do is build diversity in the scholarly publication ecosystem. And one of the things that Open Journal System attempts to do is lower the barriers of entry and for production. But that means there's going to be some failures along the way. And how do you support failure in a useful way while being cognizant that the academe is very much a reputation economy? And you do need to protect your brand and your reputation. So that's a tension I think many of us feel in this area. I'm going to give you some statistics. The growth has been quite substantial when I was looking at it. In 2009, we got 12 journals moving online. So I've given you our 2009 statistics. Now, this does not compare to Perez Hilton or Highwire Press or anything like that, but I think you saw that many of our journals are highly specialized. So I've given you some stats. The U.S. is still, we're still getting most of our hits from the U.S., secondly Canada when you look overall. I've also given you our most popular article, which happens to be from the humanities, which is interesting, and the most popular article from a student journal. Caledonia is a area north of Toronto, and there have been some native land disputes, so it's a pretty controversial topic right now. I've de-identified a few of our journals and given you some stats here. And I think what I wanted to point out here is there's a spectrum here between when a journal moves online to how long they've been. You can see the use increasing. We've got different business models. And one of the key things that I think is really interesting is the amount of traffic they're getting from search engines are going directly from bookmarks, emails, links on other pages. And we're actually seeing this trend in our repository, which is interesting. And you can see there's variation in the hits that are coming from Canada versus the US. And I have to say, I don't actually want to identify the journals, but if you knew their subjects, you would be surprised at these percentages. I was surprised at these percentages. So let's talk about roles. We, like Columbia, leave the editorial work to the journal. We do ask them some questions when they first join us, and for student journals, we get them to fill out a questionnaire, and we ask for a faculty sponsorship. With faculty, you don't ask them to hold a form, but you actually do have a conversation. Layout is currently outside of OJS, and then they have to manage their own subscriptions if they are doing subscriptions. We do provide user support, and we also help journals in seed in getting their initial setup and batch loading back issues. One of the things we're really interested in is building community amongst our journals, so we have regular user group meetings. And most of the time we actually have presentations by journal editors. So the last one was actually on a journal that has implemented DOIs, which is actually no small feat for a small journal. And we provide consultations, either through my office or through other staff in the library. We do offer fee-based web design. If those of you who know OJS knows that there's templates that you can use, but if you want to do something fancier. Right now our staffing level, because you got to know how much this costs, is at 4 FTE, and we do have partial grant funding. So that includes me and 3 technical staff. I was looking at this, and we ran anywhere from 3/4 to 2 FTE before we got the grant. I'm hoping we stay at 3 after the grant, but you can all pray for me. We also use a small army of students, and we've had anywhere from, we don't have them all year, so we have anywhere from 0 to 10 students working with us at any one time. And we have found the students really useful. Also because, how should I put this, there's not a lot of admin staff left in certain sectors of the library, but there's lots of research assistants left. And so our faculty are much more used to dealing with students than they are with admin staff. So initially, for some of the roles, we tried to train departmental secretaries. So A, there was a workload issue, and B, the faculty weren't used to it. Some of the faculty weren't used to dealing with them. So we do use students. So that's sort of a basic vanilla, I think, set of services that we try to provide. And the question is, how do you do something more? How do you add value without incurring a great deal of costs? So I'm going to talk to you about 2 ways that we've done this, and one is a grant called Synergies, and the other one is partnering with the Ontario Council of University Libraries Scholars Portal, and we're focusing on both discovery and archiving. So we were lucky enough to be part of the Synergies grant, which is being led by the University of Montreal. It is funded by the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, and it aims to build a national public infrastructure for Canadian social science and humanities scholarly publications. And the initial emphasis is on focus. It attempts to provide distributed hosting. There's 21 universities that are providing or are part of this grant. Some of them are providing services on a regional basis. There's about 70-odd universities in Canada, so that's a good chunk. It provides for some development of 2 publishing platforms, the PKP Suite and EduD. It provides for a portal for Canadian content, and archiving strategy, and also an exit strategy. How do you make this sustainable going forward when the grant runs out? So this is our portal, and we're now up to 100,000 articles, which represent 180 journals. Now, if you look at scholarly journals in Canada, there's about 665 of them. So that's not actually a bad number, given that we still have 1.5 years to go. And we've just been doing our funding partners so far. We are in the midst of almost completing a pilot with the University of Toronto Press, and they will be the first non-Synergies site to be included, and from there we have plans to expand to other Canadian journals. One of the other things that the grant has funded is code development in the Open Journal system. I know many of you are interested, so I thought I'd quickly give you an update. There was a recent new release. I think a few important things. One is sword deposit, and the other one is the citation markup assistant, which allows you to parse, edit, and export citations into the NLM XML or citation style specific formats. This work was actually started as Lemonade XML as part of the Journal of Medical Internet Research, which is hosted at the University of Toronto, not by the library, but which we archive. And the intent is to actually automate much or all of XML markup. That's the eventual goal, and it's being rolled out. So we're really excited about this. So that's the only thing I'm going to highlight on this slide. The Open Journal system, or I should say PKP, like many large open source projects, has traditional open source development schemas, but then every now and then they get big chunks of community development. And I thought you might be interested in one of the latest granted funded projects at Frey. How do you pronounce that? Frey Universitat? Okay, good. Thank you. And they're going to be looking at usage statistics, but they're also going to be looking at author rights. And since I'm here, I thought I would also give a plug for the next PKP Scholarly Publishing Conference, which comes at an awful time of the year, or a good time of the year. The other thing that I want to tell you a bit about, because I know it's being anxiously awaited by about 16 titles on my campus, is that coming soon, the 0.9 release of Open Monograph Press. So we're looking forward to testing that, and we have real content to test it with. It's going to deal with both edited volumes and single or co-authored works. Like OJS, it is rules-based, and I've got the 5 minutes. So I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to say we're indebted to Athabasca University Press for much of the development here. ERCI is the other platform, a consortium of 3 Quebec-based universities. I think what's interesting here is people think of they've been going since 1998, so it's a large amount of content. They host 75 scholarly journals, not all of them in French. And last year they did a pilot with cultural magazines and a whole lot of digitization. So they've also been developing their technology. The University of Calgary is responsible for archiving in this project. And I've just given you a bit of an update there. I think the takeaway there for those of you, again, who are interested in OJS is that there's going to be a handle plugin for OJS being developed and will be released soon as part of this project. So OKLE Scholars Portal in 3 minutes or less. So OKLE is a regional consortium started in the mid-60s. Like many regional consortiums, we provide a variety of services, 21 universities in Ontario. And I think what is different about this is that we really have tried to build a single source for accessing digital text from a variety of commercial and non-commercial sources, real emphasis on local loading. So we're almost up to 8,500 journals, and we've locally loaded 250 million citations. And our most recent project has been on ebooks. Heavy use. So as part of the Synergies project, Ontario has been focusing on loading Canadian journals into Scholars Portal as another port of entry. So you can imagine what it would mean to a small journal to be listed beside the flagship journal in their discipline. Many of them have real trouble getting indexed. So this is an example. We've just finished a 7-title pilot. And we thought we'd have great take-up, and we did, but we also got some pushback. So we actually had to explain what a discovery and archiving platform was, for example. And so we gave them some stats, but we also went through and identified the comparators. So what journals from their field were on Scholars Portal and what ANIs were. And they also had some worries. Many of our journals are deeply distrustful of aggregators, so we had to explain how we are different from an aggregator. We honor subscriptions and have, in this one-page letter, assured them, I think twice, because it's only one page, so we can't do it 4 times, that we honor subscriptions, but that the article level metadata will be publicly accessible, and that once you're in, you can withdraw your contract, but once, 2009 is in, don't come back and ask for it. Again, please and thank you. So that's been an interesting series of discussions. And I guess the slide that I picked was I was going to tell you that Ontario is now hosting 61 journals in total. It's not only the U of T, but also Guelph, Windsor, and York that are participating in this. So I've shown you the Scholars Portal work. The other thing we've been doing is working on OJS code development. First thing we worked on is enhancing Open Journal System's ability to host multiple journals on one installation. And that work is near completion and has been rolled out in the latest release. We are also doing some work on statistics, and I'm going back to do a series of interviews with editors about their statistical needs. So 2 of my colleagues did a survey of editors about what statistics are you now compiling, and what are you using, what would you like to do, and who do you expect to be sharing with? Who are you sharing with now? And of course the answer was, we'd like to collect more and we expect to be sharing with more people. That doesn't help me talk to my programmer. It doesn't help me say, okay, let's increase this function first and let's increase that function second. So we're going to try and go back and do a series of interviews, and the interviews will be distributed across the country. So I've run out of time. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to your questions.
I've been thinking about the nature of partnership today and trying to decide if my remarks will reflect a true partnership or not. I will be talking about partnership, but because at the University of Michigan most of our publishing capacity has been brought together under my watch, I'm actually talking about partnership among units that ultimately report up to me. Whereas it seems like a lot of the partnerships we've been talking about, the partners have found each other out of sort of mutual need and desire in trying to work together. We have a mandate to work together, and I transmit that mandate on a regular basis. And so my units know that they're expected to find ways to work together for their mutual benefit, but more importantly for the overall benefit of the library and the university and its mission. And so there's perhaps partnership with some teeth behind it to make it happen. I don't know. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about what we've been trying to do to build a holistic approach to scholarly publishing infrastructure at the University of Michigan. So I thought I'd start with a brief history of publishing at the University of Michigan from the beginning of time to the present day, these great 19th century titles. So the University of Michigan started publishing things under its imprint in 1858, a book on asteroids. And then they pretty much did that for many years until about 1930, when I was looking at the history of the press, this was quite entertaining to me. This distributed publishing model was deemed an inconvenience by the regents, and they looked for a consolidation under a single publishing imprint, which is right where we're back to in 2010, looking for consolidation efficiencies. And then the press continued to publish books for about 70 years. Initially, they just published things from the University of Michigan. Richard was talking about this earlier. In the 1950s, they started reprinting classics for classroom use and started looking to disciplines humanities disciplines in which the university was particularly well situated and recruiting material from outside authors. And then in the 70s, as many university presses did, they started moving into trade and regional publishing as well. 1993, the first Mosaic web browser comes out, and all hell breaks loose. So, what do I mean by this? Well, I think you're well aware that with the mechanisms for easy distribution and delivery of content, we're in a position where everybody can be a publisher. You can have your questions about whether everybody can be a good publisher or not, but the barriers to entry are radically lowered. People can self-publish, put things on their websites. Libraries can begin to set up publishing infrastructure around the web. And it was that my own library was responding to when we set up the scholarly publishing office in 2000. looking at how can we take advantage of the shifts in technology and web delivery to help our scholars get the word out in the way they want to get the word out. And there's something a little bit different, I think, about my institutional context than most. We actually started working in publishing before we started working on our institutional repository, which came along in 2004. In 2009, we set up copyright services to advise authors both on the use of materials in their work and on how to manage their own copyrights to achieve their scholarly ends. So we had all this sort of disparate publishing activity going on around campus, plus the small publishing units, which are a whole other story that I won't touch on today. In March of 2009, we saw a shift when the University of Michigan Press began to report within the library. The motivation for this, it depends on whether you want the cynical story or the less cynical story, was that it really made sense to begin to bring together the publishing activity, and that there was also, as Richard did a really good job of pointing out, a really natural alignment between the library and the press. It's also a fact that our regents were looking for demonstrations of efficiency and consolidation, and it was one place where we could look to make this happen. So now we had all the stuff going on in the library, all reporting in different areas, and library administration began to take a look at this growing area of library work and saying we really need to organize this. And so a position was advertised for an associate university librarian for publishing, which was me. I was hired. I took the job on December 3rd and somehow ended up beginning December 1st. I'm not sure how my boss managed to do that, but jumped right in. And we also created a division within the library that we call ePublishing, which brought together the repository, the copyright office, the scholarly publishing office, the University of Michigan Press, and some other term projects that we've been working on. So I'm going to now embark upon the perilous waters of extended metaphor. So this is what I came into, and I tended to think of it as a little bit of an industrial park. People were each working at their own business. They were kind of roughly in the same area. If they stumbled outside at lunchtime or for a smoke, they might talk to each other. But people were pretty much each working to get on their own to achieve their own ends. And so in the course of this first year, I feel like I've been moving people from an industrial park to a subdivision. Is this a gain or not? But when I say a subdivision, I think we're beginning to create a sense of community and common purpose, which doesn't mean that there isn't still a lot of separation in the activities. One of the things that I've done is to begin to break people out into functional areas rather than attaching them to an imprint or a particular organization. I've started with doing this in the library. We had the scholarly publishing office that was publishing stuff. And I said, well, let's look at the functions that each group is performing. We have production of print, we have technology, and starting to define those groups so that they can support a broader layer of publication, not just attached to this one set of content, but that can support the whole publishing organization. And then we'll be looking to continue to do this. What's not reflected here are some of the other things I've done at the sort of infrastructural level of desktop support, servers, finance, to create this kind of support layer. So the good thing about living in a subdivision is it can be comfortable. There can be a little bit of a community. Also, as some people are aware of, it can be alienating. It's like we're just focused on this little piece of our work. And so this is not my end goal. I'm trying to move us toward more of a model of a cooperative. And so what I'm really interested in right now is what we can do at the center to support these areas of activity. So rather than each unit having its structure that goes from editorial to production, however you define that, to marketing, and taking care of its own stuff, how much can we create that's shared? And as I said, the easy things to begin with were things like desktop support, who patches the servers. Then we started moving into accounting. How can we share our financial activity? How can we support that? The next thing we started looking at were the programmers. Rather than having them attached to particular imprints or organizations, how do we create a programming pool that's available to the whole publishing infrastructure? And we hope to continue to work our way up. So more and more is shared at the center, which doesn't mean there can't be distinct products and distinct imprints that have their own identity, but they're based on this common infrastructure. But whenever you try to create a community, a particularly cooperative one, there are some challenges, right? And we've been confronting those. As people feel like they're giving up some of what was theirs to the common good. Between the various parts of my organization, there's a lot of sort of eyeing what they're doing to make sure it's up to snuff. And every part considers snuff to be something different, right? Does it look good enough? Is it open enough? Does it have the right business model? Because of the fear that it will somehow reflect poorly on their work if the other part of the organization doesn't look as good. There are differences in opinion about where we should place our priorities, and also differences of opinion about how we should spend our money. The library side of things is very used to doing things on its own. Building things on its own, maintaining things on its own. The press part is very used to hiring from the outside. And both of those things have advantages and disadvantages, and those are issues that we walk through. I'm going to leave my extended metaphor before it crashes and burns. So we just talk a little bit about some of the benefits of a shared infrastructure. I think the most obvious thing that we get from a shared infrastructure is scale. And particularly locating that within the library. So by pooling the 50 people that work for me from these various units, we're being able to achieve economies of scale in some areas of work that we weren't able to previously. But more important, we're locating them within the library's scale. So we can take advantage of some of its technological and technical infrastructure to build our publishing program. I think what's been really valuable is that we can share expertise on real-world problems. Everybody that's working within publishing is working on getting scholarly communication out. They've got different kinds of problems that they're working on, and everybody brings different expertise to the table, but we're starting to be able to share that. We also bring existing workflows and business relationships to the table, and we can also share those. Been very valuable learning about the different kinds of vendors and business relationships that the parts of the organization have in place, sharing that, seeing where we can take advantage of those. Because we do have these varieties of perspective and experience, I think we are doing better at strategy and planning. We may be more argumentative because there are so many varieties of experience, but I think it benefits us in the long run for planning. And we have a little bit more rooms on the margin for experimentation and innovation. I don't want to exaggerate this. Our margins are still very thin, both in financial terms and just human resources. But when you have a lot of people working on a common set of problems, you can carve out some pockets to try some new things. So let me just say a word about what we actually do to try to make this a little bit real. We do monograph publishing. We host and publish journals. We do some development of new publishing models, such as community portals and knowledge bases. Electronic archiving for faculty publications and related materials, mostly through our repository, but not entirely. Also through our relationship with HathiTrust. We do education, both around publishing and copyright, and advocacy for University of Michigan authors, both in business negotiations and at the public policy level. And we also reissue materials from our collections and our faculty in new forms. So we sort of have three sets of activities going on in publishing that I think of as education and advocacy as one strand. Publishing services of the type several people have talked about today is another, particularly in the journal and conference proceedings area. And then we actually publish stuff, content. But today, I was going to focus on monograph publishing in print and electronic forms and some of the ways we're working on that. And what does it mean that we have a mandate and a goal to get our books online? How is that shaping our production infrastructure? And also has the fact that we're doing other things as well at the same time, besides getting books online, how does that shape it? So we're trying to create a production infrastructure for books, but not just books, things that are kind of like books, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, that capitalizes on the strengths that we bring to the table, and gives us a new set of tools for publishing monographs that our authors and readers want, and we're trying to keep it cheap. So these are our goals. So I'm going to talk about three types of workflow. The first I call print to screen, which is a pretty direct transfer of what's on the printed page to the screen. And this is, if some of you are familiar with our digital culture books in print, which is actually a joint imprint that preceded the press coming into the library, between the press and the library. And in this workflow, the books have always moved through a very traditional press production process. And then at the end, when they're declared done, in theory, at the moment that it goes to the printer, the book is also sent to the library, and it starts going through a digital production process. And then, it's been surprisingly hard to actually get that delivery down so that we're actually remembering to get the books online at the same time we send them off to the printer. These are just a couple of screenshots to give you a sense. Here's one of our digital culture books, the table of contents page. And this is what it looks like online. It's not terribly enhanced in any way. You can put in some illustrations, but it's a pretty straight transfer of the book to the screen. So what's good about this? Well, it's one workflow. It's very simple. Right? There's just the print book is produced, and then it gets turned into a digital book. So really, there's been no additional overhead or process redesign except remembering that the book needs to get delivered from the press to digital production at the library. So it's quite cheap. We do it with students and in-house processes that we've driven down quite a bit, so it's a couple $100 to do this and get it online. What's not so good about it is it's a one-way workflow, so there is no way to migrate changes back to the source. Everything stays tied up in that print master. It also loses opportunity for faster time to publication. If we're really good, we might get out a week or two ahead of the printers. And if it doesn't go to distribution for a while, it might be there a little bit earlier. But one of the things digital production can do is speed things up, and it doesn't really take advantage of that. And for me, most importantly, any digital functionality is kind of an afterthought. It's a book that's designed for print. And then we said, well, is there anything we can do? We can activate some hyperlinks. Maybe we can pop out the images. But it's not a book that's thinking about being digital. The second type of book I'd like to talk about is what I call the book in motion, or the animated book, which is taking a traditional linear text, but adding to it some of the things that an online presence can help with. And so these are adding things like multimedia illustration, creating links. And we're developing this as part of the University of Michigan press production process. And we've been working with Humanities eBook Project for many years and have it pretty well established in there. Here's just, images popping out of the book. Of course, you can't tell this on a PowerPoint slide, but it's just 3D animation. So the nice things about this, working with this kind of book, is you can integrate it well into an established transmittal process. And things that we've put into place at the University of Michigan Press is that when the editors are actually recruiting the book, they fill out a digital checklist that sort of captures these possibilities early on. It's starting to become part of the transmittal process to production, that at the same time as we go through everything else, we say, well, what do we have for the digital edition? Do we have the right formats? Nope, you don't have them. Okay, we're not putting it onto the schedule yet. And we're also just starting to work on a digital P&L to include the costs of this, even if we're not necessarily going to roll them into what the print book has to recover so that we know what it costs to produce it. So this is moving the digital planning upstream and helping us to ask the right questions at the right time. And I think where we are facing a significant challenge, though, is that it really takes retraining at every part of the process to get to be able to do this kind of book. It's often the production people and the programmers that know what they need, but they have to educate all the way back up. They have to talk to the editors so the editors can talk to the authors so the editors can educate the authors about what they need, and the authors have to think about that too. It also calls for an additional level of engagement with the author that's hard to scale, and an extra level of attention to permissions and materials preparation. I'm going to close, I'm close on time by just saying a few things about this third model that we're just starting to think about is, when is a book not really a book? When is it a sustained scholarly argument designed for online delivery, but it was really conceived digital, not only born digital? How do we think about doing that? And so I just wanted to finish with some questions that we're struggling with, but I wouldn't say are not. I don't think we're being daunted by. We're just trying to find some projects to test them against. When you have a project like this, and especially when a good deal of your operation is based on revenue, as ours still is, how do we think about the appropriateness of the investment? how do we engage the authors in this? And I think from the production perspective, who does what? Who's actually managing the project? Is that a role for the editor? If not, is it a new role? Do we have to hire people to do that? Or can we build on our existing strengths? Who is modeling the data? Who's figuring out how it works online? Who's making sure that the plan for long-term curation and preservation is built in from the outset? How is this getting evaluated at all phases? And we feel like if a project like this not only has to go through intellectual evaluation, which is absolutely primary, but it has to go through a technical evaluation. And what's the goal of that? Just to figure out how much it costs, which is fine? Or does its methodology, its technological methodology, have to be vetted as well? And if so, are there the equivalent of peer reviewers for that? How can we use this again? We don't want to build a series of one-off projects, and right now it's hard because these projects are few and far between to know what will be repurposable and what won't. And does there have to be a book attached? Does there have to be something that we can sell attached to it? And if we think a book might eventually emerge from this digital project, what happens if it doesn't? So these are some of the things that we're having to think about. And I guess that's really causing a shift in people's roles and how they think about themselves. I'm going to skip over here. So, yeah, what's it going to take? Time and money? Sure, we got that. So what's it going to take that we've actually got? And so these are the kinds of cultural things I'm trying to encourage in all our departments, but particularly between editorial and production roles. What are the different economies we're working in? Subsidy, grant funding, sales. How do we understand those? How do we understand our costs? Are you willing to learn a new role? I think tolerance for ambiguity is really important. People who are used to working in a production environment are very used to saying, this is what I do. I can do it well. I can do it quickly. But that you need to give up some of that. And so finally, humbleness and arrogance. I think we have to all realize we have a lot to learn from each other in terms of these partnerships, and be willing to say we don't have that expertise and we need to learn it. But I also think that these are solvable problems, and that we are the ones to solve them. So I would urge arrogance in that way. So thank you.
You have questions for the panel?
Maria, I have a question for you. What is an example of your type 3 project that you might be working on?
Can you go back and repeat the question and speak into the mic?
So the question is, what's an example of the type 3 project? I can tell you about one that didn't fly, that actually forced a lot of these questions. We had a scholar who worked in South Asian studies who had done a very multimedia-rich non-linear representation of a 5-day ritualistic performance that happens around a religious ceremony. And it was a long epic poem, and there was all sorts of stuff connected to it. And she had already created this online for her dissertation. And so had a set notion of this is how it was going to work. And it presented fine, but it was very unsustainable in terms of the technology when we looked at it. And so that was actually a project, and it was our editor was very excited about this project. He really loved it, and was like, and now we have, the library, and they can help us, and they've got all these skills. And the poor guy got it from both sides. On the one hand, he had his press director saying, "Where's the book? What are we going to sell? How can we do this without selling it?" And from the other side, he had the technologist in the library saying, "It's going to take us a year to rebuild this thing," right? And so we were having that kind of conversation. So that's one of them. We're working with another on the use of, and this one may go, we're still looking at it, use of wikis in classroom education, where they want to present the wikis as part of the publication, and to have that be a sort of growing, evolving part of the publication. And because that fits more with sort of infrastructure we understand, we feel like that might be able to do that kind of thing.
Mike?
It's also Maria. Is Penn Publishing involved in data hosting of the story described by Rebecca, or is that another department?
We are doing some data hosting in the repository, and we're looking at creating links. We're not sure on my library where data hosting is going to sit, or if it should sit in the library. So we can do small sets in the repository and always have, but we're looking at more of a sort of cross-campus effort to think about institutional infrastructure for data hosting.
Hi, I'm Barbie from Dartmouth. This is kind of maybe a little too technical question, but I was just curious if everybody on the panel is producing material in the ePub format. All I really know about that is that's a really important format to read things on your iPod and your iPad and so on. And so I'm wondering, when a format requirement like that, if you see this requirement starts to happen, how difficult is it to rework your workflows to produce that? Or is that just not an issue?
I can say a little bit about what we're doing.
I don't think it's hard.
I'll just talk. Can you hear me? To get ePub out of our old files, we're just going back and having a vendor do it because it's the cheapest and most efficient way to do it. So, and this is, I think one way in which the press benefits from the scale of the library is the library was able to loan the press money to do that, pay it back out of sales. Going forward, we're trying to pioneer or engineer a workflow where ePub can be expressed from the master file. So we're starting to do that on a small set of books.
Are you doing other formats as well?
We're mostly looking at ePub and tinkering with other things. ePub's an easy case to work on. So you can
It's really not hard.
It's really not hard. So none of our journals are doing that. What I'm really, every now and then we try and cobble a process together that will assist small journals with creating their own XML, and will provide user support. We haven't found the magic bullet yet. And most of our journals have so little money they can't go to a commercial source. So we are really looking for Lemonade XML to get them to XML using OKLE, because they will be compliant with ePub and already are. So that's.
As a vendor, we see people who are choosing to go from XML and then get ePub out of that, and we also know people who are going directly from an HTML or a lesser tagged file to ePub and sort of jumping over the XML, which is maybe not the wisest thing to do, but it's a cheaper thing to do maybe, and it doesn't take as much revamping of your workflow. So sort of the answer, I think, is it all depends. It depends who you are and how much money you have to what you need to do to get to ePub.
Mike, did you want to add something?
Question for Grant. You talked about an exit strategy for when your grant runs out.
Right.
Can you comment a bit more on what that might be?
Okay. So the grant itself is an infrastructure grant. So it is not a digitalization grant. It does not pay for subscriptions to all Canadian journals. And so I have to say this 8,000 times. So we are looking for an exit strategy to sustain the infrastructure. And there are various bits to the infrastructure. And one of them are these two publishing platforms. And we use them, the Synergies group, but they also have international partners. So one of the things we're looking at is what should we be doing and what should we be relying, and what kind of governance structure is going to. So I would say we're at the beginning of those kinds of decisions for PKP and for AeroD. And then we're also looking at the portal and what it means to sustain that. And we've got some preliminary costs, but one of the issues is that we haven't dealt with non-Synergies, highly customized journals. So who will bear the cost of aggregating that content? Is it aggregatable? If the metadata is so dirty, if it's batch loaded, is it going to hurt our reputation? Should it not be in there? So so that's the answer. I think we're looking at different models, and we've started costing, but no. And we have a year and a half. to come up with a solution. So that's does that answer your question? Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just a quick one. I was really interested in the features of OJS, the new release. But at least in a fairly sustained Google search, I couldn't find any instances online that I could go see those features. Are there any?
I don't know if there's any in production. I'm not even sure if SFU has moved to production. Our test instance is on production, but we actually haven't moved it yet. Sorry, yeah, our test instance is
Is that publicly accessible?
I could get you access, but we haven't moved to production just because the programmer in that area has been busy. We were actually talking about it at the last meeting. What we tend to do is we install it on a development box first, and then it goes to the test, and we invite our journals to test it, and then it moves to the live instance after it's lived there for a while.
Which is the wise thing to do. We actually did the upgrade and rolled it back right away.
Oh, really?
Because we needed to proceed more slowly, shall we say. We had a bunch of customizations that broke, and and we needed to have tested it more thoroughly. So Rio's method is the best way to go.